Hello, my name is Joshua Mugabi. I welcome you to Interdependence of Organisms. Interdependence of Organisms. The picture shows a tadpole, insect larva, crustacea feeding on aquatic plant. So what we are seeing in the picture here, it is an interdependence of organisms. At the bottom, we have an aquatic plant, and this aquatic plant is fed on by the small crustacean. It is fed on by the tadpole, and then also the insect larvae. They are feeding on this aquatic plant. The aquatic provide all under organisms, or the whole diagram that we are seeing. This provides an example of interdependence. So you can see that there is interdependence. The tadpole is going to become a feed to the water beetle. A water beetle which can also feed on the small crustacea, which can also feed on the insect larva. And the beetle is going to be fed on by the punch. So you can see there is interdependence, whereby one organism depends on another, and then another one depends on the other. The tadpole is dependent on the plant for its food. So our tadpole here depends on the aquatic plant for the food. The aquatic plant is providing food to the tadpole. And you will see that the tadpole, when it drops its wastes, they are going again to become manure for the aquatic plant. So there will be that dependence, a tadpole depending on the plant, and the plant is also going to depend on the tadpole. The plant is dependent on the tadpole for manure. So the plant, which is our aquatic plant, is going to receive manure from the tadpole. Or the death of the tadpole, we shall get manure which is going to be used by the plant. Even these other organisms, the roach, the perch, the frog, the pike, beetles, all of those ones, when they release their waste materials, those materials are going to turn into manure, which is going to be used by the aquatic plant. So there is interdependence. Let's look at 3 here. We have the kestrel. This kestrel, it's the blue teat. It feeds on the blue teat. And the blue teat, it's the caterpillar. The blue teat, it's the caterpillar. and the caterpillar, for it eats the leaf. So this is an example of a food chain. It is an example of a food chain. Now, a food chain is starting from our plant here. The plant is providing food for the caterpillar, and then the caterpillar is going to provide food for the blue teat. Then the blue teat will provide food for the kestrel. So that chain that we have from the plant to the caterpillar to the teat to the kestrel is called a food chain. Animals depend on plants for food. Animals depend on plants for food. For example, here we have the snail, we have the thrush, we have the hawk. All these ones are animals, and they are depending on the cabbage for food, which means that the cabbage, which is a plant, manufactures its food, which is eaten by the snail, and the snail is eaten by the thrush, and the thrush is eaten by the hawk. So when we say that animals depend on plants for food, you may find that the hawk is not depending directly on the cabbage, which is the plant, but it depends on the cabbage indirectly, in that its food, the thrush, comes from the snail, which also comes from the cabbage, which is the plant. So the sparrow hawk depends on the plant indirectly, whereas the snail depends on the plant directly. The sparrowhawk does not depend directly on the plants, but it depends on the thrushes, which eat the snails, which eat the cabbages. So our hawk is not directly depending on the cabbage, but it is indirectly through eating the thrush, which eats the snail, and the snail which eats the cabbage. So the hawk is depending indirectly on the plants by feeding on the thrush, which feeds on the snail, which feeds on the cabbage. The sparrowhawk is indirectly dependent on plants. It is indirectly. It is depending on the plants indirectly, meaning that it is depending on the plant through the thrush, through the snail. So we call that one indirectly, meaning that it is not coming directly. The sparrowhawks do not feed exclusively on thrushes. The thrushes eat worms as well, as snails also may eat many plants, not just cabbage. So when we give this food chain, it does not mean that the sparrow feeds exclusively on thrush, but it feeds also on other things. And the thrushes do not eat only the snails, but they can also eat worms. Applying to the snail does not eat only the cabbage, but it can eat many other plants, meaning that they depend on very many food sources, not exclusively on those ones that are given in the food chain. Food web. Let's look at the food web. When we talk of the food web, a food web is a combination of many food chains. Here we have the plants as the producers. We can formulate a food web. The grass is eaten by the rat, and the rat is eaten by the owl. So that one is a food chain. That one is a food chain. But we can still have the grass being eaten by the beetle, which is also eaten by the fox. That one also becomes a food chain. We can still have the grass. This grass is eaten by the rabbit, and then the rabbit is eaten by the stoat. That one is also a food chain. So many food chains interconnected is what we call a food web. So a food chain shows the alternative food source of a particular animal. All organisms, they depend on sunlight. The sun is the source of energy. And this one is going to be trapped by chloroplasts, which are found in different plant types. And that energy is going to be used in the process called photosynthesis, whereby plants make their own food using sunlight energy to combine carbon dioxide and water to form food, which is glucose, which is later converted to starch. So for example, here we have photosynthesis in wheat. Wheat will produce wheat grains. Wheat grains can be converted into flour. Flour is going to form bread. bread, which is a product going to be used by human beings. And if we look at photosynthesis in grass, it will produce food in grass, which is going to be consumed by a cow. The cow will produce milk. Milk is going to be used to convert it into cheese. And cheese is going to be used by humans. Then also sunlight energy can be used by flowering plants. During the process of photosynthesis, they will manufacture nectar, which is going to be picked by the bees, and then the bees are going to make honey, which is going also to be utilized by humans. So all the organisms, they depend on sunlight. The slide shows how 3 items of human diet are indirectly dependent on sunlight. So the products that we are talking about, 3 items, we have honey. This is used by human and it is very good in human diet. We have the cheese. It is also part of human diet. We have bread. They are all part of human diet items, but they depend on sunlight energy. Cheese depends on sunlight energy. Honey depends on sunlight energy. Bread depends on sunlight energy. So all organisms, they depend on sunlight. It can be direct or indirect. The first step in these food chains is trapping of sun's energy by the chlorophyll in green plant. So when you look at all these chains, the first step is the trapping of sunlight energy. And that trapping of sunlight energy is carried out by the plants, wheat, grass, and flowering plants. They have chlorophyll, which traps the sunlight energy. Then the green plants or their products may be eaten directly, or they may pass their energy and raw materials onto the next organism in the food chain. So we have the green plants, and these green plants are the ones that are going to be either eaten directly, like for example, the cow is eating directly the grass, or they may pass their energy and raw material to the next organism in the food chain. For example, wheat here will form wheat grain as a product, and it will be passed over to the next organism in the food chain in form of bread. This applies to flowering plants. They carry out photosynthesis and they produce nectar. Nectar is passed on as a raw material to the next organism, which is the bee. And then the bee will form again another product which will be passed on to the next organism in the food chain. Pyramids of numbers. Let's now look at the pyramids of numbers. The width of each band represents the number of organisms. So here we have our pyramid. This is our pyramid, and it is called as the pyramid of numbers. It has different bands. It has the lower band, which represents the plant leaves. The second band, which represents the caterpillars. We have the third band representing the blue teats, and then the last band representing the owls. The width of the band represents the number of the organisms. So when you look at these different bands, you will see that they are of different sizes, meaning that as you go up the pyramid, the number of organisms goes on decreasing. At the lower level where we have the producers, which are the plants, we can see that the plants, they are many in numbers compared to the caterpillar. These are the plant leaves. They are many in number compared to the caterpillars which feed on them. And the caterpillars are many in number compared to the blue teats that feed on them. The same applies to the owls. Owls are fewer than the blue teats they feed on. So that's why we are saying that the pyramid of numbers, the width of the band represents the number of the organism. Many food chains, the organism at the beginning of the chain are very numerous. For many of the food chain, you are going to find out that the organisms at the base of the food chain, they are more than the other organism. They are numerous. Those are the organisms at the base of the pyramid. They are always very numerous. At each stage in the chain, the number gets fewer. So the more we move from the lower, where we have numerous organisms, and we go to the preceding stage in the chain, the number goes on getting fewer, meaning that the caterpillars are fewer than the plant leaves, and the blue teats are fewer than the caterpillars. The owls are fewer than the blue teats. So every stage that continues in the chain above, the number goes on becoming fewer. One barn owl might feed on 10 blue teats, and each blue teat might consume a dozen of caterpillars. So you can see that if we have a dozen of plant leaves, that one is going to be fed on by one caterpillar, and 1 dozen of caterpillars may be fed onto by one blue teat. And if you have 10 blue teats, these are going to feed one owl. So you can see as you go above the pyramid, the number of organisms goes on reducing. Dependence on oxygen and carbon dioxide. Let's look at dependence on oxygen and carbon dioxide. Now, all animals, they need oxygen for respiration. All the organisms, living organisms, they will need oxygen for respiration. For the plants, they produce oxygen, and that is during the process of photosynthesis. So the plants are producing oxygen during photosynthesis, and the animals are using that oxygen for their process of respiration. Then the animals, they produce carbon dioxide in respiration. So here we are seeing that the animals are using oxygen for their respiration, but during that process of respiration, again the animals are producing carbon dioxide. But this oxygen, which was used during respiration by the animals, was produced by plants during the process of photosynthesis. Now, the plants use up carbon dioxide in photosynthesis. So we can see here that the plants, during the process of photosynthesis, they produce oxygen. And when they produce oxygen, this oxygen now is going to be used by the animals during the process of respiration. And during the process of respiration, the animals are going to produce carbon dioxide. They end up producing carbon dioxide. And this carbon dioxide which is produced is now going to be used by the plants. And the plants are using it in the process of photosynthesis. So you can see that there is dependence. When you look at the plants are producing oxygen. And the oxygen is used by the animals. And the animals are producing carbon dioxide, which carbon dioxide again is used by the plants, and they use it to carry out their process of photosynthesis. So the process of decay uses up oxygen, and it also produces carbon dioxide. So another process that is producing oxygen, using up oxygen and producing carbon dioxide, is the process of decaying, whereby organisms are being broken down into simpler forms by bacteria that we call decay. And this one, the bacteria will end up using oxygen, and as they use oxygen, they end up producing carbon dioxide. So in darkness, photosynthesis stops, but respiration will continue using oxygen and giving out carbon dioxide. So when there is darkness, That means that the plants are no longer receiving sunlight energy. And if they are not receiving sunlight energy, that means that the process of photosynthesis will stop. It will not take place. And if we don't have the process of photosynthesis, that means that now we are not using carbon dioxide. So the plant again will continue the process of respiration, because the process of respiration provides energy for carrying out the physiological processes in the cells of an organism. So because there is no sunlight energy, it does not mean that the plant will stop the process of respiration. The process of respiration will continue. And for the process of respiration to continue, it means that the plant has to use oxygen, though it is not producing oxygen. But it will produce oxygen, it will use up oxygen, and it will produce carbon dioxide. That is during darkness. So here we have the production of carbon dioxide and the uptake of carbon dioxide. When we burn fuel, for example, wood, coal, oil, and gases, we end up producing a lot of carbon dioxide. And this carbon dioxide, of course, is going to be used by the plants during the process of photosynthesis, which we know is the process by which plants make their own food using sunlight energy by trapping it from the sun using chlorophyll, and then it is used to combine carbon dioxide and water to produce glucose and oxygen. Another way of producing carbon dioxide is through respiration in all organisms. Organisms need energy, but this energy is obtained by breaking down of organic substances like glucose, breaking it down into carbon dioxide and water and energy. So in that process of respiration, where the organism is breaking down food material to provide it with energy, it ends up producing carbon dioxide, and that process is called respiration. Another way in which carbon dioxide is taken up is by absorption by the ocean. The oceans do absorb carbon dioxide. Then the process of decay in organic matter, this one also leads to the production of carbon dioxide. Process of breaking down waste materials by bacteria ends up producing carbon dioxide. This interdependence is represented by the carbon cycle. This interdependence is represented by the carbon cycle. For example, we have the atmosphere is filled up with carbon dioxide. Now, this carbon dioxide is taken by the green plants, and then the green plants will build carbon dioxide into organic compounds by photosynthesis. So carbon dioxide now is removed from the atmosphere. But again, the same plants, they do carry out respiration because they are living organisms. They need energy for physiological processes in their body cells. So they carry out respiration, which ends up producing carbon dioxide and released into the atmosphere. In addition to that, they undergo decay. When they are mature and they are old, they are going to break down and turn into manure. And this one is done by the bacteria. But in the process of breaking down into manure, again, they are going to produce carbon dioxide, which is going to be released into the atmosphere. Then the plants are going to be eaten. They will be eaten by animals, which animals will convert now the organic compounds which have been converted from carbon dioxide by green plants. Now they are going to be converted into materials into the animal tissue. Now when they are converted into the animal tissue, then the animals may decay when they die. And when they decay after dying, they are going to produce carbon dioxide. The animals can also carry out respiration. And when they carry out respiration to produce energy for their survival, they end up producing carbon dioxide. So decay and respiration, they produce carbon dioxide, which is released back into the atmosphere. And we have seen that some of these plants, when they die, they undergo a process of fossilification, or what we call fossilization. And in this one, we are going to deposit these plants in the rocks, what we call prehistoric plants. They will form deposits of coal, they'll form deposits of petroleum, and also natural gases. Now these natural gases, coal, petroleum, are going again to be used by humans during the process of combustion to provide energy for our locomotive, in our factories, in our homes, and then during that process of combustion, we end up producing carbon dioxide, which is returned back to the atmosphere. So that interdependence, that is how it is represented by the carbon cycle. When the carbon is used to incorporate it into materials in animal tissues, it again will be taken back into the atmosphere during respiration and decay. And then again from the atmosphere, it will be picked and used by the plants by the process of photosynthesis. This one again will be deposited and fossilized to form petrol, coal, natural gases, which we shall extract again and use them during the process of combustion. So that one shows the interdependence in form of carbon cycle. If only plants and animals were involved, the carbon dioxide concentration in the atmosphere would stay in a balance. That is, if we had only animals and plants, the concentration of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere would stay in a balance, because what would be used up by the plants during photosynthesis will be returned back by the animals during respiration and decay, and we would balance the concentration of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. It is the burning of fossil fuel that unbalances the system. But because we have now another addition of carbon dioxide from the fossil fuels, this is going to cause an imbalance in the atmosphere, having more carbon dioxide than what is being consumed. So there is going to be an imbalance of carbon dioxide in the system because of burning of the fossil fuels. recycling and the role of decomposers. We want to look at recycling and the role of decomposers. Plants, they depend on soil bacteria for making minerals available from dead remains. So we have the plants, there are some materials which they need, and these materials are minerals, and they are coming from plants, they are coming from animals, but they need to be converted so that the plants can access them. Now we can see that our plants, which we call the producers, which are the green plants, these ones are eaten by the consumers. So when the consumers die, they are going to be broken down by the decomposers, which are the bacteria and the fungi. The same applies to the plants. When the plants die, they will be decomposed by decomposers, which are the bacteria and the fungi. Now, when they decompose these materials, they convert them back to minerals and humus, which minerals and humus now are going to be used by the producers or by the plants. So the plants, they depend on bacteria for making minerals and other humus available to the plants through the bacteria. Since animals depend on plants, they too depend on soil bacteria. So it is not only the plants that are depending on the bacteria, but also the consumers, which are the animals, they also depend on the soil bacteria, because the animals depend on plants and the plants will depend on salts and minerals and humus deposited into the soil by the bacteria. Dependency on bacteria. Dependency on bacteria. Most bacteria are beneficial. Though we always say that bacteria cause diseases, but we have some bacteria that are beneficial. These ones, they break down dead organisms into simpler substances. Those are useful bacteria which cause decomposition of dead organisms into simpler substances. And these substances may now be utilized by the plants. For example, we have our decomposers, the bacteria and the fungi. They break down the remains of the consumers and the remains of the producers. And when they break them down, they produce soil, minerals, and humus, which are going to be utilized by the plants. So these bacteria, we say that they are useful. Why? Because they cause decay of dead animals and also dead plants. And they remove them from the environment by converting them into minerals and humus, which is used by the plants. So recycling the material. Soil bacteria make mineral salts available to the plants. We have seen that these bacteria, they are going to decompose the animal, and then they decompose the plants that die, and they produce minerals and humus available in the soil for plants to use. Bacteria and fungi are called decomposers. Our bacteria and fungi are called decomposers. Why? Because they decompose dead materials, plants and animal materials, and convert them into mineral salts and humus, which can be used by the plants. We tend to think only of disease-causing bacteria, but these are in a minority. These are in a minority. We have very many useful bacteria that are helping in very many ways, but we still have other bacteria that may cause diseases, but they are in minority. Most bacteria are either harmless or directly or indirectly beneficial. So some of the bacteria, they are not harmful, they are harmless, and they may be directly or indirectly beneficial to humans. For example, cattle and sheep, they have a large population of bacteria in their stomachs. Where these are beneficial bacteria, they help to digest the cellulose cell walls in the grass. So the animals like sheep and cattle, they cannot digest cellulose. So they are going to use the beneficial bacteria, which will produce the enzyme seculase, which is going to digest cellulose into simpler substances. So bacteria are beneficial to some animals like the sheep and the cattle because they help in the digestion of cellulose cell wall in the grass. If it were not for bacterial and fungal decomposition, we would be knee-deep in dead leaves after a few years. For example, if you look here, you are seeing that the plant is producing leaves. And these leaves, if we say they were not being decomposed by bacteria and fungi, they would accumulate in the whole of this area. And within a few years, when we are walking in this area, we would be walking in a knee deep of dead leaves. In fact, we would be buried more than knee deep in all sorts of dead matter that failed to decompose. If we did not have bacteria and fungi, then we would be buried in this dead matter which failed to decompose, because it would be more than the living matter which is available. So the leaves are only one example. The interrelationship between all living organisms are so complex that any disturbance in the pattern of interdependence can have far-reaching consequences. So if we disturb one of the interrelationship between living organisms, we are going to see a consequence which is far-reaching. Let us look here. If we come and remove the fish patch, that means that the pike has only two sources of food remaining. That will be the roach and the frogs. Thereby, we would have disturbed the pattern of interdependence, and it has a consequence, meaning that the number of the beetle will increase because there is no patch to check it. And when this one increases, it means the number of the tadpole is going to reduce. If the number of the tadpoles and the shrimps is reducing, then that means that the grass, the number is going also to increase or reduce. The number will reduce. Why? Because the number of plants will increase. Why? Because we have the beetles. They are not checked. So they will feed a lot on the small crustacean and a lot of the sea insect larvae. And when that one happens, it means that the tadpoles are also reduced. And that means that now the aquatic plant is going to over increase. Thank you very much for participating in interdependence of organisms. Please do like, share, and subscribe.